everybody, Betta here. This video is part of a series that I've been working on lately about the lovely and beautiful and tiny and colorful and very, very critically endangered Betta api api. I've had this fish species for a little while now, and I've just never really talked about it until recently because that's what I do. I do like big fun things and I just don't talk about them. But now I have a bunch of adult Betta api api, and I want to set up a more serious mode breeding project when it comes to this species. I want to be able to distribute them as far as I can, just to as many people who might be interested in keeping Betta api api, because this species might be incredibly threatened because of habitat loss. But what's the best way I can think of to try to establish it in as many home fish tanks and fish rooms as possible? To just spawn them and get lots of little babies and be able to send pairs to people. That's like my goal. I want more people to be interested in keeping them and breeding them. Down in the description, I have a little link where you can actually sign up to a newsletter, and I'll send an email out to the newsletter list as soon as maybe I have an update available. I don't know when that's gonna be yet. In my last video on this species, I made a lovely fish armoire from IKEA. It's my new fish room in a cabinet. And this cabinet that I've made is going to be where I keep all my breeding pairs. I went through the whole process of setting up the cabinet in my last video, but I had to pause, and now I'm back and I'm gonna finish it. The first item on my to-do list before I can get the fish in is to establish some way of temperature control. This room that the fish armoire is in, it can get a little bit chilly sometimes, and this is a little tiny species of very tropical, warm water loving fish, and I don't want them to get cold. If the temperature were to dip down one chilly winter night, I don't want my little babies to get cold. So I need a way to be able to establish some sort of temperature control in all 14, I think, of the tanks that I'll be putting in this cabinet. I could do this with 14 individual heaters, but that is just like a cable management nightmare, and I would need so many plugs, and that doesn't sound efficient. So I wanted to try something that would take substantially less plug space. I think I'll be able to heat all of these tanks fairly well with just some reptile heating cable and a thermostat. This is a really long one. I need to get this set up. I want to make sure that this is gonna work before I get the fish in. So the first step is to get my heating cable in. Actually, I just thought of something. In all 4 of the shelf spaces, I'll be using an old aquarium light to, light all of the tanks. In the past, I've mounted these lights with a zip tie that has one of the little screw holes on it, so I can just screw them to the top. But I'm feeling a little lazy today, and I'm just gonna use some mounting tape. This stuff is for car parts. I think it's gonna be very reliable when it comes to very lightweight, cheap plastic aquarium lights. So I'm just gonna cut off some little squares. Hopefully this works. Kind of stick them onto the light. I'll do 2 little squares. I'll just stick it to the top. Please work. It worked. So now I have to set up this heat cable, and that might be a little bit tricky. I've drilled a couple holes in the backs of my shelves. Also on the back of each shelf area, there's a grommet that I can pass things through. So we'll start at the bottom, the plug will go through that grommet. And then I'm so clever. There we go. When I threaded the heat cable through, I tried to make sure there was about an equal amount on each shelf. So now I get to go adhere it in place. You'll see. To do that, I got some cable clips. I hope they work. You have to be careful with heat cable. When you arrange it in place, you don't want the heat cable touching each other because it can get really hot and it can ruin your heat cable. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use these little clips to grab onto the cable and adhere it into place because it's a sticky strip. Feels pretty solid. On the instructions it says to wait 24 hours. A little paranoia is good for this stage. Putting the cables up took until the next day, but I love how it turned out. So you can see that I organized it all so it doesn't touch each other. Using those adhesive cable clips, I was able to arrange it really nicely and feed it through the various holes that I drilled throughout. And I think this is gonna work out pretty nicely. The next thing that I have to do, the fun part, is testing it to see how I did. I'm a little concerned because I've never seen anybody heat multiple tanks using a method like this. Now that I have it all set up and I'm ready to test it, I need to attach a thermostat to my heat cable. Using a thermostat that has a little temperature probe on it, and you put the temperature probe where you want to be measuring your temperature, you can control the heat cable. This is critical, you really need this. So I plug the heat cable into the thermostat tells it when to turn on and off and keep it perfectly level at the temperature that you want. So I'm gonna get this set up. Cable management is the last thing you do, right? Ugh, yikes. I set up my little thermostat right here just to see how everything's gonna work, and I set it to 90 degrees. This is the heat cable plugged in. The probe, which is this little white cable right here, is going up through the backside, and I taped it right here, right onto the cable. I can feel the warmth in the heat cable. I feel the warmth! It's time to get some tanks in here to see how it does. I went ahead and filled up these little tester tanks with cold tap water, and 2 of them have lids, 2 of them don't. I don't know if that's gonna make any difference. But now I'm just gonna go do things, go about my day, and then I'll come back later and I'm gonna see what their temperature is. My goal is to have water right around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, the heat tape is set to 90. Can it heat these tanks up to 80? That's what I wanna see. When I introduced this project a couple weeks ago, I got a lot of questions about something. Is there going to be too much condensation building up inside of my cabinet? I don't think so, and here's why. It's because this particular cabinet from IKEA, Evar, it's the Evar cabinets, they're not airtight. They don't fully seal. If you look here, there is a gap in between the doors. This is something I can fix with a little part that I could buy off of Etsy to bring them in closer. Also, if I move over here, you can see that this door, I guess you can't really see it on the camera, that's not fully airtight either. So even with the doors closed, there's still some air exchange. And if it does get too humid in here and there's condensation, which I don't want, I do have an idea. I have some little tiny USB computer fans that I could mount somewhere just to blow some air around. I am gonna close my doors. I'll come back later. I'll see how this worked. I am pretty excited to see how this does. It's a few days later, and I think this is gonna work. I think! What I ended up doing was I took the little thermostat probe, off of the heat tape itself, and I put it into one of the tanks. Now, do keep in mind that the thermostat I have, the probe is waterproof. It's waterproof. And so far, it seems to be doing a pretty decent job. I'm a little bit impressed. Now the question is, when I get all the tanks in here, is it gonna be enough to keep all the tanks at a good temperature? Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I think it's time to get all these tanks in. Those tanks look so nice in there. The next step is obviously to prepare the tanks. For me, that involves making some low pH setups since I'm trying to mimic their natural habitat to encourage breeding behavior. I make my own water to do this, and I use Brightwell Aquatics pH buffering substrate, Florin Volcanate, to make and to keep the water slightly acidic. I keep saying I'm going to do an official how-to video about this so I can go into the details, and I swear I'm actually going to do it this time. It's on my video to-do list. I chose the darkest color available and the smallest granule size because I think it'll look really nice with this petite fish. I put about 1 inch or 1.5 inches in each tank. I ended up going through almost 2 bags of substrate. Next, I got my air and my sponge filters all set up. I'm using this Eheim pump because I read somewhere that it's one of the quietest air pumps available. And so far, that's proving to be true. I have 2 of these powering this cabinet. Each one's powering 6 to 8 small sponge filters. In my previous video on this cabinet, I started cycling these filters. So after filling the tanks, I'll just add a little bit more bacteria and fast start bacteria food, and these tanks should pretty much be ready to go. Earlier in the day, I had made a big bucket of my special water, which I'll totally go over how to do when I make my special how to make a low pH tank video, I promise. I slowly pump the water from my bucket to my tanks, especially when first filling up tanks with a nice planted tank substrate like Flora and Vulcanite. You're supposed to go really slow to avoid any potential muddiness. I was about to move the last 4 tanks in, ones that actually have Oppie Oppie in them, and I noticed that the backs weren't painted. It's like 1 a.m. right now, but it's much more important than sleep. Gotta get the backs painted. Also, I was doing all of this while multitasking a household and a toddler and another kid and family and all that stuff. I think I was a little exasperated that night. My 5-gallon tanks needed some nice tight lids, so I made them in the same way that I make all of my other sliding glass lids, with plastic T-molding from Home Depot, which I'm cutting to size here from some extra pieces I had. I got some custom glass cut from my local glass shop, and I fit it into the plastic molding, and voila, sliding lid. I added some plastic handles too, just for ease. The smaller tanks are getting a little piece of acrylic that's cut to size. I added some cabinet bumpers to the bottoms to prevent them from sliding around too much. It ended up looking pretty slick. Here is it practically finished. Open up this bottom one. Check it out. So the tanks are all set up. They all have their buffering substrate in. These are my actual Oppie Oppie tanks. I have some groups of fish in here. I will be pairing these off into some male-female pairs for each of the tanks. And they're definitely a little shy right now because I just moved their tanks. They are not showing themselves. And then same, here are the bottom tanks. The temperature is holding fairly well. It's in like the mid to high 70s. I'm gonna do one adjustment. I've actually decided I'm gonna be doing a little modification to bring this gap together so it's a little more sealed. So I'll be waiting on a part. I thought originally I would be actually finishing this project today, but I am not doing that. This project was supposed to take me a few hours. It's been 5 days, because that's what it's like having 2 little kids when one of them's a toddler. Just hold out till preschool, Taylor. In my last video about these fish, I took all these sponge filters that I'm using and I pre-cycled them. I did it in a little tank of mine I have in my office, just using like bacterial starter and some bacteria food just to get the cycle going. Instead of getting the fish in today, I'm just gonna add some more bacterial starter and food into these tanks and get the bacteria establishing just a little bit more. Just gives me a little bit of time to recuperate from the past 5 days of trying to finish a project and this just never being able to have one thought to myself. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.